Thank you. Good morning to everyone present. I thank you for the opportunity to hear me, to see me. I am the granddaughter of Eva Green and Bessie Wright Graham, the great-granddaughter of Cora James and Neely Graham. Their sacrifice is why I'm here.
You can state your name also.
Yes, my name is Tracy Elizabeth Taylor, but they were survivors. I'm a member of Louisiana Survivors Reform for Coalition. I represent Catalyst to Change as well. Value. I'm here to share my story because I know firsthand what it means to be a survivor of abuse, seeking safety and protection for my life. Problem. I live daily with multiple chronic illnesses, rare diseases, one of which is multiple sclerosis. In addition to the trauma from nearly losing my life to domestic violence, felony strangulation, I sought help from the police and nonprofit agencies multiple times before and after my abuser choked me. He would gaslight me, never apologizing, insult me, steal from me, plagiarize my photography works as his own, physically, mentally, emotionally disable me, and try to berate me into shooting him. He told me it would have been solace if I had shot him after the strangulation. I supplied the police and the courts with his written confession of strangling me with no regard to my health, the audio recordings of the event, including before and after, with forensic evidence. Also in his writings, written admission of assaulting other women, even as a teenager with a baseball bat. He stated, quote, "I've stayed out of prison because of white and rich connections and just sent to inept anger management classes or therapy. I reiterate, that is what my abuser wrote." Because of this, he was never sentenced to past crimes, no criminal history, and no paper trail exists due to his connections. My case and my life was not given the attention and intention that it was warranted. I have never been arrested as a survivor, but I know that I am so close to being criminalized or killed if he hurts me again and I react to save my life. Since escaping my would-be murderer, I have massive housing instability. Since leaving my abuser August 29, 2020, I suffer more with post-traumatic stress combined with many multiple sclerosis relapses, which means I can't walk some days. The other challenges include cognitive challenges, the pain throughout my entire body, bladder incontinence, and now utilizing a mobility cane to walk. In the past year, I have had to move twice because of damage to apartments from Hurricane Ida and several emergency room visits. Too many survivors are left in this impossible situation while reconstructing our life to live healthy and healed. Though I struggle daily with the trauma I have experienced, I see myself as a survivor, overcoming all obstacles and challenges. I survived, and I remain in fellowship with communities of survivors who support one another. This is my why. I know too well what the other outcomes are: prison or death. Prison or death. My dear friend and sorority sister, Illyria Cyrus Reed, was murdered in her Denham Springs home by her husband January 15, 2014, after she had already moved out and the courts would not extend the order of protection to her children. Right now, Louisiana ranks number 2 for the most deadliest states for women. Right now, Louisiana ranks number 2 for the most deadliest states for women. Right now, Louisiana ranks number 2 for the most deadliest states for women. I am not safe. You are not safe. Women are not safe. And the laws and support systems exist at this very second. If we can't depend on a system for vitality, you know it's not just to incarcerate and re-victimize survivors. Solution: as survivors, we lift up and support each other. We need you as legislatures to heed the advice of experts and pass laws to make our state a safer place for the most vulnerable to emotional and physical violence. Legislation like this. Let us know as survivors that you see us, our lives as valued, valuable, and that we matter. I ask you, vote yes on SB 251. I humbly ask you to vote yes on 251.
Thank you, ma'am, for your testimony. Ms. Hunter-Lowry or Mr. Harrell, whichever order.
My name is Katie Hunter-Lowry. I coordinate the Louisiana Survivors for Reform Coalition. I'm here today because everyone deserves safety regardless of their access to resources or their location. And like has been said, we know that it is common when someone's safety is threatened that they act to defend themselves. This is true for survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence, and sex trafficking, all of whom this bill would support. We've seen over and over that survivors do not get the help they need when they're trying to get and stay safe. LSR staffed the Survivor Informed Task Force, and we had a seat on the task force, which included representatives from DOC, the Public Defender Board, LDAA, and many others. We researched the problem of victim criminalization in our state, and Louisiana currently ranks number 5 and highest in the nation for domestic violence homicides. We learned as a task force that instead of receiving the safety that they needed, survivors are too often criminalized and incarcerated for acting in self-defense, that survivors were operating from a place of extreme duress and coercive control, but this context was not included in the legal system, and so their actions were misinterpreted in the eyes of the law. One of the biggest reasons that we need this bill is because it is a district attorney's job to get to the truth, and we have really lost sight of what public safety is and who is truly a danger to society when a district attorney association opposes a bill that would allow a survivor to share their truth in a court of law. The association does not speak for all victims, and they do not represent the values of every district attorney in the state, many of whom are seeing incredibly high numbers of domestic violence cases come through their doors each week. This bill provides a context for people in violent situations who currently have to choose between death or prison. And it provides a pathway to relief for those who never should have been convicted in the first place, like Sandra, like Beezy, like many others. And as Professor Morrow said, this is not even hundreds of cases. This is a very small universe that we're looking at that needs this pathway to relief. And honestly, it is the LDAA who should have brought this bill in the first place, considering the perspective that they have on this issue. Their victim witness advocates see close up how victims are failed at every single level, then further traumatized by incarceration when all they were trying to do was get help. SB 251 would address this problem proactively. At its core, it would protect survivors of DV and sexual violence by starting to implement the recommendations of the Survivor Informed Task Force that we all worked on together. Prison is not a place for survivors, and it's not a place where trauma can truly be addressed. I was present at the hearing of Senator Mizell, your bill, SB 148, and that is a wonderful piece of legislation. We are asking for this body to consider proactive measures to those situations and act consistently with that law by passing SB 251. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Mizell.
Thank you, Mr. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. You may not have the answer to this. I was just speaking with your colleague. What's the difference in the circumstance when 2 men get into a self-defense situation where wife dies at the end?
Yeah, I will leave that to be answered by Professor Morrow since I am not an attorney, and I think I can probably speak to the actual statute in the law. He can take my seat now if you'd like that answer.
I would.
Yeah, let's go ahead and call Professor back up, and then Mr. Harrell will let you speak next.
Thank you for your question, Senator Mizell. Do you mean 2 men who are in an intimate relationship? Or just any two people in general?
2 men, right. Because and tell me if I'm misinterpreting this. Because it seems to me that the weapon, a woman having to resort to a weapon changes the result of the crime. And I'm not talking about the bill, I'm talking about the circumstances where you're in.
Yes.
So, and I'm just curious if it's 2 equally sized men and they get into what happens?
You're absolutely right, Senator Mizell, that gender plays an important component in things, and one of the aspects of gender is just often our female clients tend to be a lot smaller than men, and in the literature and among police departments and in police trainings, people use the term equalizer or equalizing weapon, and so they'll see that men who attack women, the women may have bruises that appear days later, but the men then end up with, if a woman grabs a knife that just happens to be in the kitchen, the men end up with stab wounds. So often the police will get there, and it'll seem as though a female domestic violence victim is the aggressor because they have to resort to those weapons, and that's something that people have been trying to train police departments on and things like that. But we see that actually women receive longer sentences. Women who defend themselves, for violence against their abusers, than men receive for violence against women. So that's a really important question. Right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Dr. Mosqueda. Mr. Harrell.
Good morning or afternoon,
Good morning.
Committee. I'm Will Harrell. I'm the Senior Policy Counsel at VOTE. I speak with you every single week, but this week I want to bring another perspective from another life that I live that you probably don't know about. I'm ranked #1 in the world in my division as a no-gi jiu-jitsu fighter, and #4 in the world in my division as a gi fighter in jiu-jitsu. Twice a week I train kids, girls and boys between the ages of 5 and 12 how to defend themselves with Krav Maga or jiu-jitsu so that they don't end up coming to testify in a committee with the stories that you've heard. But some of them will. And in our training, and when I say my training, my colleagues and other trainers and students are not just people like me, but we're talking about majority are first responders, military, active or former military, including police officers who lead these trainings and instruct children and adults in the martial arts and self-defense fighting techniques, the use of hands and weapons. This is just not our perspective, but the perspective of law enforcement who go into the community to teach people how to defend themselves every day. In addition to helping people gain these skills, we work with a lot of women who have been victims of domestic violence, and men as well. And it's remarkable. I am not an expert in psychology or psychiatry, but I do see the manifestation of the trauma that these situations can occur. Sometimes it takes months, if not years, for women to be able to even be placed in certain positions that we're trying to, a choke defense that we try to teach. It takes months or years for women to even be able to withstand in this safe environment how to be calm and react to this. So the trauma is real and lasting, and we encourage you to support this legislation. Here we have a state that honors the right to protect property through use of weapons and other means. Certainly we as a pro-life state, we should be able to encourage or allow a woman or man in an abusive situation to bring evidence to a judge to demonstrate the causal connection between these actions and their situation and their trauma. Thanks for hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Harrell. Senator Ward.
And I do have a question on that last point. Has that been part of the problem in some of the maybe convictions in the past? They have not been able to present evidence.
The opportunity to make the causal connection between their trauma, their abuse, and their action.
Okay.
But perhaps the law professor would be better situated than me to answer that question, but that's my understanding.
So through different motions and things throughout the pretrial process, they're able to block that information from coming.
I'd be happy to answer that, Senator Ward. So for decades, so right now the way the law stands, you are allowed to introduce expert testimony, but only in the self-defense situations. And what we've seen is for decades, there's been a pervasive misunderstanding among judges and even defense attorneys that they could even introduce expert testimony in domestic violence self-defense cases. Like in Ms. Taylor's case, her attorney didn't understand that. In Ms. Starr's case, her attorney didn't understand that. And they both had trials without any sort of expert testimony to explain these dynamics. And in 2018, so the Supreme Court in 2018 clarified, yes, you are allowed to introduce this testimony just in self-defense situations. And they actually said that an attorney had an obligation to do that. But courts haven't been applying this Curley decision to older cases, like they didn't apply it to Ms. Taylor's situation, for example. And there's other, we had probably 20 to 30 women who didn't have any experts who came up to explain that connection. I hope that answers your question.
No, I mean, to some extent it does. I mean, it seems like that's a huge flaw. I mean, the entirety of the case rests on that, and you can present no information, not just lay information, no expert information whatsoever on what led up to it. Okay. And I figured that's what had happened and what was happening, and I was just kind of wanted to, not just for myself, but for maybe the whole panel to better understand.
That's exactly right. There are some laws limit which way some evidence could be introduced, and then also just attorneys didn't even understand that they could introduce this evidence.
Thanks, Professor Castillo. Just one more question for Senator myself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm just trying to understand the realm of situations that take the partnership component out of it. It's just kind of really out of balance. And I'm thinking when Ms. Taylor said the man came to the door and forced his way in. If that were a home invasion, she defended herself, what would have happened?
It was a home invasion,
It
right?
was
And I think what you're pointing out is something we see all the time. We have stand your ground laws in Louisiana. Laws we all believe in, laws on the books, but they haven't really been applied to domestic violence situations. I think the majority of our clients killed their abusers in their own home, just like Ms. Taylor. In her case, she had called the police within 24 hours asking for her abuser to be removed from her home. And if that's, I think right now we see district attorney's offices, they might prosecute the abuser for a home invasion or a strangulation in a case like this. But then we see situations where a survivor actually ends up defending herself successfully. And unfortunately, there's just kind of this disconnect, like the man would have been prosecuted for a felony crime of violence, but when a survivor actually defends herself, unfortunately, we haven't been able to make that connection in our legal system, and the survivors end up getting prosecuted.
Is this in place in other states? Are we an outlier in this, or is this pretty much a standard way that the case is handled with the lack of expert testimony? In terms of self-defense cases, we do allow for expert testimony now, and there's been a growing consensus over the years that should be allowed. The Louisiana Supreme Court in Curley cited a report from the Department of Justice, the Federal Department of Justice from the 90s actually, that said we should be allowing for expert testimony, and we've seen a trickling of states allowing more and more, but the issue is in Louisiana it's only limited to the self-defense context. So I know, right? So it's not allowed. There's nothing explicitly allowing it in the context where you might, when an abuser says, "Get in the car, we're going to commit this burglary," Right.
and so that's kind of an issue with Louisiana law. But there's widespread consensus that we need expert testimony on this issue because even the best intentioned people, people who sincerely care about victims don't always understand these dynamics and really do need experts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, members, the board is clear. Thank you for coming today.